first thing the fields remembered was his name. It was not spoken loudly, never shouted across the rows as overseers did when calling men like cattle. No, it was breathed low, muttered between bent backs, passed on the damp wind that rolled heavy with pollen and sweat. Malachi, a syllable that made the overseers' dogs bristle, their ears pinning flat, a growl caught like thorns in their throats. The cotton field stretched like a pale ocean, endless, their blooms bending toward the sky as if begging for rain that would not come. Beneath their white crowns the soil lay dry, cracked and hard. Yet wherever Malachi walked, whispers claimed the ground soured. Children swore the soil beneath his shadow darkened, as if scorched by a fire too deep to be seen. Some said his footprints lingered longer than others, holes that swallowed water and refused to give it back. The men and women who worked beside him pretended not to see, yet their eyes betrayed them. A glance here, a furtive sign of the cross there. When his name passed their lips, it carried weight, like a word pulled from a grave. They feared him, yes, but not as they feared the lash. Their fear of Malachi was older, heavier, carved from some unseen thing crouching in the dark. At night, while the overseer drank himself sour in his quarters, the cabins whispered. They told of Malachi's birth beneath a blood moon, his cry muffled with ash to keep him from drawing spirits near. They told of how he stared too long at the fire, eyes reflecting not flame but void. They told of how the hounds refused to bite him, how once, when the lash cut too deep across his back, no blood came forth, only a black seep, thick and clotted. That did not stain the earth where it fell. Best not say his name, one old woman croaked, twisting straw between her fingers. But it calls itself, don't it? Murmured another, voice trembling. A name like that. It don't stay buried. In the far fields, Malachi worked without complaint, his hands moving with dreadful precision. His knife, no ordinary blade, but one sharp and smooth as glass, gleamed each dusk as he scraped the husks clean. He did not laugh with the others, did not sing the weary work songs that rose like fragile smoke. His silence cut deeper than any whip. The overseer noticed too. He had eyes like polished stone, hard and empty, and he watched Malachi as one might watch a storm brewing in still skies. "There's wicked in him," he once muttered after a night of rum. Her curse stitched under his skin, but curses did not stop him from wielding the lash, from seeking to break the man who would not bend. Yet for every strike, Malachi's eyes grew colder. They were not defiant, not openly. They were not begging either. They were waiting, and the fields felt it. Birds fell quiet when he walked. Wind stilled. Even the sun seemed to dim. Its light curdled as if afraid to touch his skin. One boy no older than 12 claimed he saw Malachi speaking to the soil when the night was blind with clouds. Bent low, lips moving, voice like gravel against wood. He said the ground shivered as if listening. He said roots shifted, pale worms writhing free from their burrows to coil around Malachi's hands. When the boy told it, the others hushed him quickly, for such words were dangerous, but true. For in the mornings the cotton near Malachi's row always withered faster. The stalks leaned and grayed, their blooms brittle, crumbling like old bone. The overseer spat when he swore the land itself grew lazy under Malachi's hands. He threatened, he struck, he cursed, but still the plants died. The whispers grew thicker. He carries the devil's breath. No, older. Older than that. The ground don't want him. Can't the ground remembers? One dusk when the sky was bleeding red and the dogs refused to leave their kennels, Malachi paused in his work. He lifted his head slowly as though hearing something distant. His eyes traced the line of the horizon, where black trees clawed at the sky. His lips parted, not in song, not in prayer, but in something low, something rumbling, something like a name not meant for human tongue. The others bent lower, feigning blindness, yet every heart rattled like dry seed pods in their chests. For in that moment the air changed. The cotton fields swayed, though there was no wind, their blooms bowing toward Malachi as if in reverence or in fear. The soil beneath his feet darkened, the cracks spreading wider, as if hungry for more. A stench rose then, faint but undeniable, the sweet rot of meat left too long in the sun. Someone gasped. Someone else began to pray. But Malachi only lowered his head once more and returned to his work, the knife in his hand glinting like a promise. And though the overseer's lash still cracked across the land, though the dogs howled in their sleep, though the cabins whispered of blood moons and cursed births. One truth spread wider than all. Malachi's name had burned into the fields, and the earth itself bore the scar. Far off, deep beneath the rows of cotton, something shifted, something vast, something stirring awake, answering the name whispered into the soil. The ground trembled, faint but certain, and the darkness did not close back in. The whip did not sing that season. It screamed. Its leather cut the humid air with the sound of torn flesh before it even struck, a sound that echoed across the cotton rows like thunder. Every man and woman bent lower when they heard it, shoulders curling, hands trembling against brittle stalks. The lash was not meant for rhythm anymore. It was meant for spectacle. The overseer wanted the sound to reach every ear, to carve its lesson into marrow itself. The overseer was a tall man, raw-boned, with a voice like iron scraping against stone. His face was always flushed, either from drink or wrath, though no one dared guess which. The dogs trailed him at all times, ribs sharp beneath their hides, teeth bared even in stillness. He ruled the fields like a carrion bird, circling, striking, feeding on fear. That year he struck harder, longer, crueler. Some said the soil demanded more blood to balance what Malachi had stolen from it. Others said the overseer simply sensed the shift, the growing unrest beneath Malachi's silence. Whatever the reason, the lash grew restless, hungrier than before. "Raise your back, boy," he spat one morning at a worker who faltered. The whip cut down, leaving a red river across the man's spine. The cry that followed was not just pain, it was surrender, and the overseer grinned, showing teeth yellowed and rotting, as if he fed not on food but on agony itself. But when the whip touched Malachi, something shifted. It was not that he did not flinch, though he did not. It was not that he did not bleed, though the wound sealed quicker than it should, the seep thick and dark. It was his eyes. They lifted, slow as a storm rising, and for the briefest moment they caught the overseer's own. In them burned no defiance, no plea, only an ember, long smothered, pulsing like coal beneath ash. A promise of fire yet to come. The overseer spat again, unsettled, though he hid it behind another strike. The whip cracked harder this time, tearing cloth, raising welt. Malachi did not cry out. He bent his shoulders, kept his hands steady, and the cotton knife in his grip did not tremble. That night in the cabins, whispers ran wild. "He ain't human. He's waiting for something. Lord, don't let him wait too long," the old woman with the straw in her hands muttered. "The lash is waking what should stay buried." Her eyes rolled white, as though seeing far beyond the cabin walls. Every strike is a drumbeat, and something's marching to it. The children huddled closer to their mothers. A boy asked if Malachi felt pain at all. His mother hushed him, warning the name itself was dangerous in the dark. But even she could not deny the truth. The lash no longer broke Malachi. It sharpened him. Days bled into weeks. The overseer struck at the slightest falter, yet the more he struck Malachi, the more the man's silence grew unbearable. It was not submission. It was not defeat. It was waiting. One evening, when the sun sagged red against the horizon, the overseer found Malachi alone at the edge of the rows, his blade catching the dying light. The air was heavy, thick with gnats, the silence so loud it seemed to press against the skull. "You hear me, boy?" The overseer growled, voice thick with drink. "You break like the rest, or I'll break you myself." Malachi lifted his head, slow, deliberate. His lips parted just enough for a whisper to pass, though no ear caught the words. The overseer stiffened, for the dogs began to whine, hackles rising, eyes fixed on the darkening soil beneath Malachi's feet. "Speak louder," the overseer barked, though his voice faltered. Malachi did not. His gaze lingered, cold, fathomless, ember-bright. Then he lowered his head again and returned to his work as though no lash, no overseer, no world existed outside the cotton stalks and the waiting blade in his hand. The overseer's face went pale with fury. He raised the whip and struck once more, harder than ever, the crack splitting the dusk like lightning, and then came silence. No cry. No breath. Only silence so deep it felt alive. The field stilled. The cicadas ceased. The very dogs slunk backward, tails between their legs, refusing to meet Malachi's shadow. The overseer lowered his whip with a shaking hand, though he would never admit it shook. He turned away too quickly, muttering curses that faltered at the edges. The workers did not speak of it, but all knew what they had seen. The lash had not broken Malachi. It had awakened something inside him, and that night, as the moon rose swollen and red, the cabins woke to the sound of chains rattling where none should be. From the well, from the earth, from beneath their own beds. In the silence that followed, a voice seemed to drift through the rows, low and rasping, as though pulled from the soil itself. It was not the overseer's voice. It was not the voice of any man. It was the sound of the ember stirring to flame. The first thing to vanish was not the blade. It was the sound of the night. Where crickets should have sung, there was nothing. Where owls should have mourned, the air lay still. Only the barns breathed, their rafters groaning like old bones in the dark, as though straining against some unseen weight. It was on such a night that the smokehouse wall was found bare, the place where the butcher's knife once gleamed, now marked only by dust and shadow. No one saw it taken. No one dared to ask. Yet every back felt the absence. The blade had hung there for years, its handle worn by many hands, its edge honed to slice through sinew with one stroke. It was a farmer's tool, a butcher's craft, but also something older, something that seemed to remember each drop it had tasted. When it was gone, the air changed, heavier, hungrier, as though the barns themselves waited for blood to fill the silence. The workers whispered in the cabins. It was him. Who else could it be? Don't speak his name. The eldest among them, her hair white as cotton turned to ash, pressed a finger to her lips. Knives don't walk off walls by themselves, she murmured. But sometimes they choose their hands. The others crossed themselves, though their prayers felt thin in the dark. That very evening, Malachi walked through the rows with nothing in his hands, yet the shadows seemed to bend away from him, as if aware of what he carried unseen. Children swore they saw the bulge of metal beneath his shirt. Others said his hands glistened faintly in the dusk, though no work had dirtied them. Inside the barns, the smell of smoke and old blood thickened. The rafters sweated pitch. Mice that once scurried freely now lay stiff in the corners, tiny teeth bared in death. The dogs refused to cross the threshold, whining at the door, their eyes fixed on the space above where the blade had hung. The overseer noticed too. His face hardened when he saw the empty wall, his jaw tightening as though biting down on fear. He barked at the men to search, though none moved. "A tool is missing," he said through clenched teeth, "and I'll have it back before morning." His hand trembled on the whip, though he held it steady enough to hide from most eyes. But Malachi's gaze lingered on him, steady, unblinking, and the overseer looked away first. That night the air grew unbearable. The cabins sweltered, though no fire burned, sweat dripping into mouths that could not pray fast enough. Somewhere, far off, a door creaked open, though all doors were barred. The workers lay awake, listening for the scrape of metal against wood. It came faint and certain, the sound of sharpening, slow, deliberate, a rhythm like a heartbeat dragged across stone. One boy sat up in the dark, whispering, "It's him. He's honing it." His mother covered his mouth before he could finish, trembling as though the words themselves might draw the knife nearer. The sound did not stop until dawn. By morning the overseer's dogs were gone. Only their collars remained, twisted and broken, hanging from the fence posts like trophies. The overseer raged, striking every back he passed, but his eyes betrayed his fear. He avoided the barns, he avoided Malachi. When the sun sagged low again, the barns groaned louder. The rafters dripped with resin, black and tar-thick, falling like tears. Beneath their beams a shadow moved, though no man entered. Workers walking by swore they heard whispers from within, low, rasping, not in any tongue they knew. Some claimed the knife itself was speaking, testing the name of its new master. Malachi stood at the edge of the field, eyes fixed on the barns. His hands hung loose at his sides, but every worker saw it. The faint shimmer of steel where none should be, as if the air itself bent around an invisible blade. And when he finally stepped inside, the barns fell silent again. The rafters ceased their groaning, the shadows stilled. It was as though the structure itself exhaled in relief. No one dared follow. No one dared breathe. Only when Malachi emerged, his shirt loose, his gaze darker, heavier, did the world resume. He walked past the overseer without a word, and though the man's hand hovered at his whip, he did not raise it. He only watched, pale, sweat glistening along his brow. That night, as the cabins shivered with fear, the sharpening began again. Louder this time. So loud it seemed to scrape inside their skulls, and with each stroke came another sound, softer, wetter, like flesh parting from bone. When morning broke, the overseer's lash was found on the barn floor, split clean in two, as though struck by lightning. Hand above in the rafters something swung, not a body yet, but a shape wrapped in burlap, dripping slow dark stains into the hay below. The workers did not speak of it, the overseer did not touch it, and Malachi did not stop walking with his hands empty, though everyone saw the blade gleam when the light caught him just so. The barns still held their breath, waiting for what would come next. The rot came first, before the flies, before the swarming black veil that blotted out the sun. It was subtle at the beginning, the faint souring of salted pork, the faint wrinkle of noses when barrels were opened, but within days the meat turned quickly, faster than salt or smoke could save it. Carcasses hung from hooks in the smokehouse, their skins splitting open with wet sighs, releasing a sweetness that did not belong to food, but to graves. The workers gagged when they passed, the overseer cursed and spat, yet nothing slowed the decay, the barn's sweated stench. It soaked the rafters, dripped down beams like rancid oil. Men swore their hands carried the reek no matter how long they washed them, their palms marked by an invisible stain. Women found it clinging to their skirts, to the hair of their children, to the straw where they lay their heads. And then the flies came, not the thin scatter that followed spilled milk or ripe fruit. No, these arrived in storms, thick and endless, black clouds that settled on skin and would not lift. They swarmed the smokehouse first, so thick they covered windows in a living curtain, the glass trembling beneath their bodies. They crawled over hooks into barrels across the ceilings, humming in a single endless note that shook the bones. The overseer struck out at them with his whip, but they only thickened, landing in his hair, his beard, his ears. He bellowed, slapping his own skin raw, yet the flies seemed to prefer him above all others. The workers watched from the rows, silent, their eyes fixed on Malachi, who stood untouched. For though the flies swarmed the fields, the barns, the overseer's flesh itself, none dared land upon him. Instead they circled him like a crown, a black halo shifting in the dim sun. Wherever he walked, the swarm followed, rising and falling with his breath, as though his body pulsed with some hidden nectar they alone could sense. "Lord help us," a woman whispered in the cabins. "He walks with a plague on his shoulders." "No plague," the old woman hissed. "Plagues pass, this chooses." The nights grew worse. Flies invaded the cabins, crawling across lips as people slept, filling mouths, nostrils, ears. Children woke screaming, spitting wings. The sound of buzzing drowned out prayer, drowned out thought. By dawn, the walls of the cabins were black with them, as though painted in tar. Still Malachi slept untouched, his cot, his skin, his breath clean, unmarred. When he walked among them, the flies peeled from the walls to follow, and the smell of rot thickened. The overseer staggered under the torment. His flesh grew pocked from bites, his eyes bloodshot, his temper fouler than ever. "This is witchcraft," he snarled, though his voice trembled. "That bastard brings this on us." One evening, as the sun burned low and red, he confronted Malachi at the edge of the fields. His whip hung limp in his hand, heavy with sweat and filth. "What have you done, boy?" He spat, his voice cracking under the endless drone of wings. "What curse you carryin'?" Malachi lifted his gaze, slow as always. His lips parted, but no words came. Only a faint sound, low and guttural, like the hum of the flies themselves answering through his throat. The overseer flinched, stepping back, whip hand trembling. The dogs that once snarled now cowered, their tails tucked, eyes fixed on the black crown spinning above Malachi's head. That night, the cabins did not sleep. The buzzing never ceased, the rot never loosened, and in the barns the meat swelled, split, and bled anew, as if fresh wounds opened in the flesh long since killed. Workers swore they saw shapes in the carcasses, faces pressed beneath skin, mouths stretched open in voiceless screams. The flies feasted. Their bodies gleamed fat with what they consumed, and when morning came, they poured out of the barns in rivers, thick enough to shake the ground, thick enough to blot out the sun. In that darkness, Malachi moved. His figure was barely visible, but his eyes glowed faint in the swarm, ember bright, guiding the black cloud, as if it were tethered to him by invisible chains. The overseer's voice rang out once more, hoarse, desperate. "God strike you down," he shouted. But his prayer drowned beneath the buzzing, swallowed whole. For when the swarm lifted suddenly, scattering into the night like ashes on the wind, the overseer was gone. Only his whip remained, coiled in the dirt, covered in a thin film of wings and blood. The workers bent their heads, not daring to breathe his name. The old woman whispered, "Flies don't eat the dead. They eat the living piece by piece." And in the silence that followed, a new sound rose from the well, iron against stone, chains clinking in the dark, louder now, closer now, answering the hum of wings. The night arrived like a predator, silent and hungry, swallowing every sound before it could reach the ears of the living. Even the hounds, creatures bred to hunt and howl, remained mute, their throats rasping and raw as if the act of barking had been wrenched from them. Their eyes, wide and glinting in the pale light of the crescent moon, followed shapes moving between the cane stalks, long shadows that should not have walked. The wind stilled, and even the whispering of the leaves seemed stifled, smothered by the weight of something unseen. Malachi moved through the cane with his usual calm, hands loose at his sides, yet every stalk bowed as he passed. It was as though the earth itself knew his passage and feared what he carried within him. The overseer's quarters lay empty, doors shuttered, windows dark. No sound emerged, no creak, no shuffle, no moan, but a distant, unnatural hum ran through the night, threading the blackness like cold silk. The workers huddled in their cabins, listening. Old women muttered prayers under their breath, clutching rosaries that seemed suddenly brittle and useless. The younger ones whispered, "Something walks the fields tonight, something not ours." Their words trembled and broke like dry twigs beneath a storm. From deep within the cane, a figure emerged, tall, slow, deliberate. Malachi's silhouette was elongated by the sickly light that strained between the leaves. The air seemed to pulse around him, thick and sweet with rot and earth. No animal moved, no insect stirred, but the stalks quivered as if alive, and every shadow stretched toward him. "He walks with the dead," one boy muttered from a cabin window, voice tight with terror. "I saw him once." Eyes like embers following him. His mother clutched his shoulder, shaking her head. "Don't speak it. Don't let him hear." But the figure of Malachi did not need ears. He carried the memory of every lash, every cut, every whisper in the soil with him, and the cane seemed to pulse in rhythm with that memory, swelling, bending, whispering secrets of the earth that should have remained buried. In the distance, the moon shrank further behind a veil of clouds, hiding from what it could not witness. Stars blinked out one by one, leaving the sky an abyssal canvas. The wind, when it moved, carried whispers not spoken by human lips, a soft, raspy language, low and guttural, threading between the stalks, sliding along the ground. It spoke of hunger, of judgment, of fire and flesh. The overseer finally stirred. He had been hiding in the shadows of the veranda, eyes wide, hands tight on his whip. He had thought himself brave, thought the lash made him master of all, but tonight he felt the weight of something far older pressing down upon him. His throat constricted. He could not call for the hounds. They had turned their backs, silent and trembling. The overseer's breath hitched as a shape slipped through the cane, near enough that he could hear the subtle shift of stalks against one another, the soft scrape of metal along soil. He saw nothing, yet felt the presence of something vast, something tethered to Malachi, following his every step. And then the whispers reached his ears, louder now, clearer, the words curling into meaning he did not understand but feared nonetheless. "Leave," a voice hissed, dry and thin, like wind across bone. "They will not hear you," muttered another, deep and wet, like water running over drowned lips. The overseer tried to move. His legs refused, nailed to the ground by dread. Malachi paused in the clearing just beyond the reach of the cabin light. His eyes glowed faintly, ember bright, reflecting the hidden fire of the earth beneath him. He raised a hand slowly, deliberately. The cane parted before him, and the shadows moved in rhythm with his gesture, stretching, writhing, pressing closer. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, wet soil, rotting leaves, and a faint tang of iron. Flies, those black clouds from before, gathered near the edge of the cane, drawn by the pulse of Malachi's presence, circling, waiting. They were silent now, motionless, yet their numbers multiplied, darkening the space like storm clouds before rain. From the horizon a low groan rose, almost imperceptible at first, then louder, a vibration through the ground beneath the overseer's feet. Something massive stirred in the hidden marshes beyond the fields, drawn to the black flame that was Malachi. The overseer's stomach churned. He recognized the sound of power beyond human control. The boy at the cabin window screamed suddenly, high and broken, as if the shadows themselves had reached inside him. The old woman shrieked in reply, clutching her chest. From the cane a movement broke. Shapes pale and gaunt slithering along the ground, limbs twisting unnaturally, faces pressed to soil, their mouths opening in silent cries. They followed Malachi, drawn to him like moths to an unseen light. The overseer lifted his whip, voice cracking, "Stop him! Stop him!" But the words died in his throat. The ground quaked beneath his feet. Shadows lengthened, overtaking the clearing. The moon hid entirely, leaving him in pitch darkness, pierced only by the faint, terrible glow of Malachi's eyes. And then he saw it. The stalks of the cane were moving on their own, bending and coiling as if alive, rising into forms taller than any man. Faces, pressed from the shadows themselves, whispered in unison, low and urgent, calling something he could not understand. The overseer stumbled backward, tripping over roots and soil that should not have grown there. Malachi stepped forward. The hounds remained silent. The wind carried the hum of unseen wings, and the smell of earth turned sour. The overseer's cry caught in his throat as the shadow shapes rose, towering and unmoving, yet undeniably sentient. The night was hollow, yes, but it was no longer empty. Something old, something patient, something hungry had awakened with the whisper of a name, the scrape of a blade, the ember of fire beneath ash. The overseer's eyes met Malachi's one last time. The glow of those eyes reflected in the silvered tears of the boy at the window, in the black wings of flies gathering like a storm. And then the overseer vanished into the coiling shadows, swallowed by the cane and the silence that had waited for him. Above, the moon remained hidden. The wind fell still, and the earth beneath the fields trembled quietly, as though something immense and patient had stirred, and it would not rest until it claimed more than just a man's fear. The first thing the fields noticed was the absence of sound. No whip cracked. No boot struck the dirt with authority. No hounds bayed in the early light. Only the wind sighed through the cotton rows, carrying a weight heavier than any breath could bear. The overseer did not rise from his quarters that morning, or the next. His door remained shut, the latch unbroken, yet the air around it pulsed with a dread that pressed the workers' backs to the walls. The crows arrived before the men dared leave their cabins. They gathered atop the barns, the smokehouse, even the rafters of the overseer's veranda. Their eyes glinted black in the pale dawn, beaks slick with something dark and wet. A few fell to the ground, wings spread, twitching as if writhing from some unseen force. The survivors dared not approach, only stared, huddled and muttering. "They're feeding," whispered an old woman, clutching a rosary until her knuckles bled. "Feeding on what's inside." No one spoke of what had been inside the overseer, not aloud. The children trembled when their eyes met the black shapes in the rafters, mouths opening only to swallow back a scream. The wind carried a low hum, almost imperceptible, like the vibration of iron chains dragged over stone. Malachi moved through the fields as if the world itself parted for him. The cotton stalks leaned toward him, pale leaves brushing his arms. The crows paid him no mind, circling him as though he were a conductor, and they his orchestra, black wings cutting through the morning haze with hypnotic precision. He did not speak. He did not raise his knife. Yet the smell of iron and earth clung to him, thick as smoke, as though the soil remembered every lash and every stolen moment of life beneath it. One boy crept from a cabin, eyes wide and trembling. He's alive," he whispered. "I saw him move by the cornrows." His mother clutched him, shaking her head. "Don't look. Don't see what should not be seen." But the fields would not allow hiding. The cotton trembled, groaned, and rustled, like whispered voices passing from stalk to stalk. The crows cawed suddenly, a chorus of discordant cries that echoed through the air, sharp as knives, and one by one they swooped down toward the overseer's quarters. They pecked at the door with maddened insistence, their beaks slick and wet, tearing at the wood with a fury born of something far older than hunger. The smell reached the cabins then. Rot and iron, smoke and soil, an aroma that spoke of secrets buried too deep, of sin and wrath and the weight of a man undone. Mothers held their children close. The older men shook, clutching farming tools they had used since boyhood, though none dared step outside. "It's him," muttered one, voice breaking. "The boy. No, the man. He's done it. Done what the earth demanded." Malachi paused at the edge of the field, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the overseer's door. In his hands, the knife gleamed faintly in the dying light of morning, though he had not moved it. The crows stirred as he shifted, rising into a vortex above him. Wings beating with a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the soil itself. From inside the quarters came a sound, or perhaps it was not a sound, but the absence of one, a hollow emptiness that pressed against the walls, against the floorboards, against the ribs of every living thing nearby. It was a silence so complete that it rang in the ears, as if the overseer's very breath had been drawn from him, leaving only space and dread. "They're waiting," the old woman whispered, "waiting for what he's taken." And in the stillness the first blood ran down the rafters, thin rivulets, black and shining, dripping slowly onto the floorboards below. The crows leaned closer, their heads cocked, beaks glinting, eyes unblinking. The workers could not look directly. Their stomachs churned. Their hearts hammered in panic. Yet even in terror they knew the overseer would not emerge. Malachi's gaze lifted to the rafters. He did not smile. He did not flinch. He only inhaled the ironed air, letting it settle in his chest, letting it mingle with something older, hungrier, that pulsed just beneath his skin. Then came a movement from the shadows beneath the eaves. The door to the quarters creaked slowly, a long, tortured sound that split the silence. No hand touched it. No wind passed through, yet it opened inch by inch until a single dark shape slipped into the light of the field. Something tall, distorted, carried the outline of a man, but nothing human remained in the posture. The sway, the raggedness of its form. The crows took flight, a storm of black wings spinning into the sky. The fields shuddered, leaves and stalks quivering as if the earth itself were trembling. And the shape, neither overseer nor man, stood at the edge of the cotton rows, staring, listening, waiting. Malachi stepped forward. The figure did not flee. It did not move toward him either. It only waited, a silence more terrible than the lash, heavier than the cries of the crows, darker than the blackest night. From the cabins the whispers rose in chorus, frantic and broken. "Don't let it touch him. Run, child. Run. It's coming for us all." The shape shifted slightly, revealing a gleam of wetness along its distorted face, red, dark and glistening under the waning light. Its eyes, hollowed and unseeing, seemed to drink the field dry of fear and hope alike. Malachi's hand fell to the knife at his side. The crows circled him, forming a dark crown that pulsed with anticipation. The earth trembled, low and steady, as though some hidden heartbeat had begun again. And in that moment the overseer's silence became something alive, something patient, something hungry. The fields waited. The wind held its breath, and in the rafters above, the first of the crows dropped limp, wings spread, eyes fixed on Malachi as if marking the beginning of a reckoning yet to come. The well had always whispered, even before Malachi came. Its stones were slick with moss and rot, rimmed with shadows that pooled like water, thick and black. On warm days children dared not approach, for the wind seemed to carry faint voices upward. Voices strangled and broken, begging, cursing, laughing in tongues that no living mouth should know. And when the sun sank low, the air around it thickened, the earth trembling with a patient hunger. They say Malachi cast the chains down. Heavy iron links, black with age and blood, vanished into the well's depths as though swallowed by darkness itself. No splash, no sound, nothing. Yet for weeks afterward the water trembled, ripples spreading like fingers, as if reaching for something lost above. Workers who passed the well at night swore the air smelled of rust and rot, and that a low clinking rose from below, faint at first, then louder, until the sound could not be ignored. One evening, the old woman with the ash-white hair muttered to herself near the edge, "Chains do not vanish. Chains remember. Chains wait." Her hands shook, knuckles white as the stones beneath her feet. The children huddled behind her skirts, wide-eyed, ears straining. "Do they bite?" one whispered. "Do they come up for us?" "They bite what is near," the woman said, voice brittle. "What is careless?" What smells of sin? Malachi approached, slow, deliberate, the soil darkening beneath his boots. The crows above circled in tight rings, wings beating in unison, black halos over the well's opening. Their cries were sharp, urgent, warning, or perhaps chanting. No one could tell. The chains beneath the water shivered at his presence, a metallic moan that twisted upward. Mingling with the whisper of cotton and the wind through the cane, the overseer's whip lay discarded nearby, broken in two, forgotten. He would not rise from this night again, and none dared call his name aloud lest the darkness hear and come seeking them next. Malachi bent near the well, gaze fixed, hands loose at his sides, yet something moved in the depths, something patient, something alive. "The water calls him," whispered a man hidden behind a tree. "Calls the boy." "No, the man. To it." The sound rose then, unmistakable, clinking like iron links dragged over stone, echoing from the bottomless dark. It was a rhythm that carried through the fields, vibrating in the bones of those who listened. Some prayed, some wept, some fled, but none could quiet the noise. It came too easily, too insistently, as though the well itself were breathing, alive, ready to claim what Malachi had awakened. Malachi's eyes glinted faintly in the dim moonlight, and the water beneath shimmered black, reflecting a light that should not exist. He raised a hand slowly, and the chains stilled, as if frozen by an unseen command. Then, just as slowly, they began to rise, twisting and coiling, their links scraping and rattling, forming a shape, a noose of iron, a crown, a spiral that reached for the surface. From the cabins, whispers rose in fear. "He's calling it. God help us, they are his now." "All of them." The old woman's hand flew to her mouth. "Chains do not forgive," she whispered. "Chains do not forget. Chains do not stop." Malachi's lips moved slightly, though no words could be heard. The well answered him. The chains rose higher, writhing as if alive, and the water itself bubbled, black and frothing, spilling over the stone rim in slow, viscous waves. The reflection of the moon fractured, twisted, and a new shape appeared beneath the surface, something vast, something long and impossibly thin, stretching deep into the black. A sudden gust swept the field. The crows cried aloud, wings beating frantically. The chains shivered violently, striking the stone walls with deafening clinks. The children screamed, the adults covered their ears, but no one could stop the rising tide of darkness from below. Then the chains began to move on their own, slithering over the stones, curling toward Malachi's feet. They wrapped around the edges of the well like serpents, rising, pressing upward, as though seeking something, him, or the life that clung to the surface. The ground beneath the cotton trembled, roots breaking, stalks bending, shadows twisting toward the black water. "He commands them," the old woman gasped. "The boy commands what should stay buried." Malachi stepped closer, eyes fixed on the coils of iron. The chains writhed, twisting into shapes that resembled arms, fingers, faces pressed into the links, mouths opening and closing in silent cries. The hum of the field, the wind, the distant cane, the crows all merged into a single pulse, a heartbeat of iron and dark water. The water's surface broke suddenly, and something emerged, not fully, but enough to see a shadowed figure, elongated, writhing. A mask of iron chains fused to its form. It glistened wetly, reflecting the moonlight in fractured shards. Its head tilted toward Malachi, hollow eyes searching, mouth opening in a silent scream that echoed in the marrow of all who watched. The chains snapped then, violently striking the ground with a deafening clang. A section fell across the cotton, leaving deep gouges in the soil, rusted links that rattled even as they settled. The figure receded, slipping back into the black water, but the pulse remained, the hum lingered, the chains promised return. Malachi stood, unmoving. The crows above fell silent, perching on the rafters and barns like stone sentinels. The workers trembled in the cabins, praying to gods that had abandoned them long ago. And the old woman, her voice breaking, whispered one final warning: "Chains do not rest, chains do not forgive, chains do not sleep, and neither does he." In the moonless night the well bubbled faintly as if breathing. The chains clinked again, softly this time, almost tenderly. But the sound reached every cabin, every field, every stalk of cotton. I promise lingered in the metallic echo. The well had not released what it held, and Malachi's hand had only begun to guide it. The earth waited, trembling, and the black water pulsed. The dream came first, heavy and unrelenting, as though the night itself pressed its weight upon her chest. She lay in her chamber, candlelight flickering weakly against the walls, yet the shadows stretched longer, bending and twisting where no light should reach. In the corners, shapes moved, thin, elongated, whispering a language older than memory. And in the center, a man with no face carved into the walls, his hands sliding along the plaster, leaving lines of darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe. She awoke with a start. The bed beneath her was wet, the sheets clinging to her skin, though no wound marred her body. The scent of iron and rot clung to the air, heavy and insistent. Her heart pounded, each beat hammering against ribs that felt suddenly brittle, fragile under the weight of something unseen. "They're here," a voice whispered, so soft she thought it might be her own. "They see you." The mistress sat upright, shaking, candlelight quivering across the floor. The walls were empty, yet the air felt thick with carved shadows, dark lines etched by unseen hands. Her fingers brushed the sheets, and the dampness spread cold along her skin, sticky and clinging, though she could not understand its source. Down the hall, the servants whispered, voices hushed and frantic. "Something moves at night. They know your name. The bed? The sheets." She shivered, hearing the faintest scrape like claws dragging across stone. The candle flickered violently, shadows twisting, elongating until they formed shapes she dared not name. The bed creaked, though no weight pressed against it. The drips continued, slow thick drops falling onto the floor, onto the carpet, leaving dark stains that smelled faintly of iron and smoke. Her gaze fell to the walls. The shadows had not left. They lingered, pressed thin and dark, lines like those from the dream stretching and shifting as though alive. And in their midst the faceless man appeared, not in the walls, not in the dream, but in the corner of the room, a void of black that pulsed with silent intent. "What are you?" she whispered, voice cracking. No answer came. Only the faint, wet sound of dripping, the slow clinking of metal, as though chains were being dragged across the floor. The shadows in the corners began to move, curling, stretching, forming twisted limbs and faces that screamed in silence. She pressed herself to the wall, eyes wide, feeling the pulse of the room against her skin. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying the hum of the fields, the cotton, the cane, the ever-watchful Malachi. Something from beyond her chamber seemed to pull at the edges of her mind, tugging at memory, at fear, at understanding she was not meant to grasp. "They follow him," the old woman's voice echoed in her mind, distant but certain. "And he follows them." The mistress's breathing quickened. She rose from the bed, wet sheets clinging to her like a second skin, and moved toward the window. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the night was darker than any shadow should allow. In the garden below, shapes moved among the hedges, tall, thin, twisted limbs bending where they should not. The faintest glint of metal caught her eye. A blade, thin, sharp, glimmering in the black, moving as if held by no hand. A sudden sound drew her back. The door creaked. She froze. The shadows shifted, gathering near the threshold. She could see them now clearly. Faces pressed from darkness itself, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes black hollows. And there, standing among them, the faceless man, knife glinting faintly in the candlelight. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. The bed dripped again, wet and red, though no wound marked her skin. The shadows reached out, thin fingers pressing against her arms, her face, her neck. She felt the cold of iron, of earth, of death brushing her skin, biting, tasting, marking. "They know your fear," a whisper hissed in her ear, cold as the soil outside. "They know your blood." Malachi's presence seemed to press through the walls, felt rather than seen, a pull of earth and shadow and hunger that made the candlelight quake. She realized with a sudden sickening understanding that she was not the target, not entirely. She was witness, a witness to the reckoning already in motion, to the chains in the well, to the rot in the smokehouse, to the ember light of Malachi's eyes that no prayer could touch. The faceless man tilted his head, as though noticing her fully for the first time. And in that instant the shadows lunged, filling the corners, pressing against the floor, rising toward the ceiling, folding the room in darkness. The mistress screamed, a raw, broken sound, swallowed immediately by the black. The candle guttered, casting one last pale light across the walls, revealing lines she had never seen before, scratches deep into plaster, wet with some substance that gleamed like blood. And then the candle went out. Only the drip remained. slow, wet, certain, echoing across the chamber like the tolling of a distant, cursed bell. Outside, the garden was still, yet something moved in the shadows, watching, waiting. And above, the crows circled the rafters once more, beaks wet, eyes unblinking, bearing witness to what had begun inside the mistress's chamber. The fire came without flame. Ledger pages, brittle with age, began to curl and smoke, yet no torch had touched them. The air thickened with a bitter, choking sweetness. Paper turned ash, ink bleeding into darkness, yet the edges remained untouched by heat. Every name recorded, every mark of ownership vanished silently, rising in curling tendrils of smoke that seemed to twist toward the rafters, seeking some higher witness. The overseer's records had been meticulous, cataloguing every soul in the fields, every strike, every stolen moment, and now they were gone except for one. That one name burned deeper into the pages, glowing faintly even as the rest disappeared. It pulsed in the smoke like a heartbeat, insistent, impossible to ignore. Malachi stood at the center of the room, hands loose at his sides, eyes steady. He did not touch the ledgers, yet the smoke twisted around him, bending as though he had drawn it by force of will. Crows tapped against the window panes, wings beating softly, beaks slick, eyes fixed. The house seemed to inhale, pulling air and ash toward the center. To him, they're gone, a woman whispered, voice trembling. All of them. Every name but his. The old woman's hand flew to her mouth. Everyone erased. But he remembers. He is the memory of all of them now. The smoke rose, twisting into shapes that mimicked faces. Each wraith-like visage writhed silently, mouthless, eyes hollow, pressed toward Malachi as though seeking something buried in his flesh, his mind, his bones. And he met them with the stillness of a man who had seen too much, carried too much and intended to see it all through. Outside, the wind whispered through the cotton rows, bending the stalks toward the house. The trees shivered, their roots twisting as if feeling the pull of the names lost to the smoke. Flies, black as storm clouds, circled in tight knots near the window, silent now. But their presence was a warning, a memory of rot, of decay, of hunger unfulfilled. A servant entered cautiously, eyes wide. "Sir, the ledgers, the names, the smoke." Malachi turned his gaze toward her, unblinking, unyielding. She froze, breath caught in her throat. The smoke coiled around her feet, curling upward, twisting to trace the outline of her form. She tried to step back, but the floor seemed to shift beneath her, bending, stretching. She fell, hands clawing at the ground, and the smoke moved over her like water, cold and suffocating. "They are calling," the old woman hissed from the corner, wringing her hands. "Calling what is left." Calling him. Malachi did not move. The glow from the one name intensified, sending rivulets of smoke into the rafters. Shadows formed along the walls, stretching long, thin faces pressed to plaster. Silent mouths opening and closing in mute cries. The mistress's chamber flickered in the mind. A memory, a warning, and the scent of wet iron carried through the air. The servant screamed, and the sound twisted into a hollow echo, bouncing across the rafters and the fields beyond. Her body went limp, and the smoke settled around her like a second skin, curling into her shape, marking her as witness, or perhaps offering her as tribute. "They burn," whispered a child behind the doorway, hands pressed to lips. "They burn the names. But he is not gone." Malachi stepped forward, the smoke bending like water around him. The one name shimmered, ink glinting faintly like molten metal. It pulsed, and with each pulse the room seemed to shift. Walls stretched, floors groaned, the ceiling lowered as if pressing all inside toward the center, toward him. The crows tapped faster, wings scraping, calling, circling, their cries forming a rhythm that matched the smoke's pulse. The old woman fell to her knees. "Do you see it? Do you see what he has become?" Her voice trembled. Not a man, not a memory, but the keeper, the living ledger. Outside, the wind rose, tearing through the fields, bending cotton and cane alike. The air carried the smell of iron and ash, of charred paper and the faint tang of fear. In the rafters, black shapes moved, wings beating like 1,000 hearts. Malachi's hand fell upon the table beside the ledgers. The single name glowed brighter, pulsing faster. Smoke curled upward in a perfect spiral, forming a shadow that seemed alive. Long arms, faceless head, mouthless scream. It hung in the center of the room, trembling, watching. And then it reached for him, a dark extension of every lost life, every erased word, every stolen breath. He did not flinch. He only extended his hand, and the shadow recoiled, twisting into the shape of a manless, faceless form that pressed closer to the glowing ink. The room trembled. The air thickened. The crows squawked, and in the fields beyond, the earth seemed to shiver as though it felt the pull of a hand stronger than any plough, stronger than any whip, stronger than time itself. And then the ledgers themselves shivered, ash and smoke twisting into letters, words, names, some whole, some broken. The glow of the single name pulsed once more, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The mistress's chamber, the smokehouse, the fields, the well, they all seemed to wait, listening, trembling. And in the center, Malachi remained still, hand hovering over the burning ink, face unreadable, eyes glowing faintly in the suffocating dark. A final curl of smoke rose, coiling higher than the rafters, forming a shape unmistakable and terrible, the faceless man from her dreams, carved from shadows and ink, reaching toward him, whispering without voice, a promise of what was yet to come. The ledgers smoldered again, faint sparks rising like fireflies in black smoke, and the crows cried, circling the rafters in warning. The servant remained still, trapped in the smoky embrace, silent now but marked, witness to what had begun and would not end. The fields outside waited, trembling with anticipation, bending with the weight of memory and loss, and the single name pulsed, deeper than before, a heartbeat of darkness, promising that no ledger, no slave, no soul would ever escape the reckoning of Malachi's hands. The swamps waited. Mist rose from the water like the sigh of some great unseen beast, curling over gnarled roots and the bones of trees long dead. The air was thick with rot and iron, each breath heavy, saturated with the memory of past sins. In the hush of night a sound echoed, a cleaver striking against unseen stone. Sharp, metallic, precise. It cut through the silence as though the swamp itself were an instrument, playing a dirge for those who dared to remember. They say the sound belongs to Malachi still, though no man has seen him in decades. And yet every swing, every ring, carries with it the pulse of life and death intertwined. The waters ripple in response, black and reflective, revealing shadows that twist into shapes of men and women, faces pressed against the surface, mouths opening and closing without sound. A lone traveler moved along the narrow path between the cypress knees, boots sinking into the mud with each step. The fog wrapped around him, cold and wet, clutching at his clothes, at his hair, at the very air in his lungs. The cleaver rang again, sharper now, closer, though he saw no one. His breath quickened. His pulse thrummed like the wings of a trapped bird. "They say he never left," muttered a voice from the mist, soft, brittle, like dried leaves breaking. A woman emerged from the shadows, old, eyes dark and wide, skin like cracked porcelain. "He walks with the rot, the blood, the names." "You hear it? The flesh? The cleaver?" The traveler strained. There it was again, the wet, unmistakable sound of flesh being divided. Not a scream, not a whisper, but a rhythm that pressed into the bones. Each strike seemed to echo across the swamp, vibrating in the roots, the mud, the water itself. He stumbled, clutching a tree, eyes wide as the fog shifted. Shapes moved in its folds, limbs bent unnaturally, bodies half submerged, faces upturned in silent horror, mouths stretched open, as though begging for mercy that would not come. Malachi appeared as he always had in the stories, a shadow within the shadow, a ripple in the fog, eyes glowing faintly like embers deep in a hearth long extinguished. His hands held the cleaver, worn and dark, its edge slick with something the swamp seemed to recognize, respect, even fear. The shapes of the dead, those he had claimed, those erased from ledgers, those whose names he had burned, gathered around him, bending, twisting, silent witnesses. "Who are you?" The traveler whispered, voice trembling. "What are you?" Malachi did not answer. He raised the cleaver, and the water rippled violently as if acknowledging the command. The fog thickened, coiling like a serpent, and the shapes in it swelled, pressing closer to the traveler, closing off paths, hiding escape. Each step he took, the echoes of flesh being cut followed him, wet, deliberate, precise. The mist seemed alive, carrying whispers in a tongue older than the trees, older than the earth beneath his feet. "They remember," the old woman said again, stepping closer, eyes fixed on the figure in the fog. "They all remember, and he carries their memory." The traveler's skin crawled. He reached out, trying to touch the fog, to steady himself, but it pressed back, thick and cold, wet with the unholy scent of iron and rot. The cleaver rang again, striking against something unseen, stone, bone, memory, and the sound resonated through his chest. He fell to his knees, hands over his ears, but it continued, relentless, echoing as if every swing were carved into the world itself. The shapes around Malachi shifted suddenly. Faces formed in the mist, twisted, mouthless, eyes hollow, pressed together like clay, but each blinked with recognition. They knew him, they feared him, they revered him, and he did not flinch. Each movement of the cleaver, each metallic ring, carved their presence deeper into the swamp, into the water, into the mud that had swallowed countless names. A crow descended, landing on a dead branch, its beak wet, eyes black and unblinking. It watched him, watched the traveler, watched the clearing fog that seemed alive with intent. Then more joined, a dozen, 100, circling in silence, as if marking the passage of a legacy older than any man could claim. The traveler looked around, panic rising like bile in his throat. It's alive, he gasped. The swamp, the cleaver, him. They call it justice, the old woman whispered. They call it memory. But it is something older, something patient, something that feeds on the living as it keeps the dead awake. Malachi swung the cleaver again, and this time the water bubbled, black shapes rising just beneath the surface, twisted limbs, hollow eyes, mouths opening in silent cries. The mist shifted to swallow him, then released him. The cleaver raised high, dripping with shadows and memory, yet no mortal blood could stain it now. The traveler stumbled backward, heart hammering, mud sucking at his boots. The swamp seemed endless, alive with waiting, with the pulse of names lost, of chains sunk, of flesh divided. Every ripple in the water, every bend of a root, every swaying cypress knee whispered the legacy of the butcher. And the traveler understood the truth too late. The swamp did not forget, and it never forgave. Malachi's eyes met his, glowing faintly through the mist, and the cleaver rang one final time, louder than any sound before. The vibrations seemed to slice through air, water, bone, and mind, and then the shapes beneath the fog rose higher, taller, faceless, and twisted, pressing toward the traveler, toward the world beyond the swamp, carrying the pulse of every name erased, every life claimed, every ledger burned. The mist swallowed the traveler in an instant. Only the cleaver remained, suspended mid-air, dripping shadows, the echo of its strike lingering like a heartbeat across the silent swamp. The crows rose, screaming, a dark choir of witnesses, and the water shimmered black, reflecting nothing. Yet everything, memories, fear, death, and the endless patience of the man who had never truly left. The hush settled again. The swamp waited. And if one listened too long, the wet metallic echo of flesh being divided could still be heard, carrying across the water, whispering the name that would not die. Malachi.